There comes a moment in every nation's journey when it must look itself in the mirror and ask, what are we really fighting for? I've lived through decades of conflict, from Vietnam to Iraq, from Afghanistan to Syria. And each time we've been told it's about security, about justice, about spreading democracy. But the older I get, the clearer the pattern becomes. And when I look at what's unfolding with Iran, I cannot help but ask the question many are too afraid to ask: is this truly about Iran? Or is it about power, about control, about global domination? I don't speak these words lightly. I know the cost of war, not just from headlines and documentaries, but from the mothers I've cried with, the soldiers I've interviewed, and the children I've met in refugee camps. I've seen the trauma etched into their eyes. So when the drums of war start beating again, this time toward Iran, I feel a deep ache in my soul because it feels so familiar, too familiar. Let's talk about Iran, not as a government, not as a military target, but as a nation of people: mothers, fathers, students, musicians, poets, children. Human beings who laugh, cry, love, and dream, just like you and me. They are not just pieces on a chessboard for superpowers to move around. Yet time and time again, it feels like that's exactly how they are treated: strategic pawns in a bigger game. Because what is this really about? Weapons of mass destruction. We've heard that story before. Human rights? Then why are we silent when other allies commit abuses just as grave? No, the through line isn't morality. It's strategy. It's resource. It's the positioning of dominance across oil routes, trade corridors, and geopolitical influence. It's the belief that to stay at the top, you have to push everyone else down. And I know some people won't like to hear that. But let's not kid ourselves. Empires don't thrive on peace. They thrive on control. They expand by creating enemies, manufacturing crises, justifying interventions. And if you look at a map of US military bases across the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, one glaring absence remains: Iran. That should tell you something. I once sat down with a young Iranian woman, just 22 years old, who told me, "We wake up every day not knowing if today is the day the sky will fall." Her voice cracked, not from fear alone, but from exhaustion, from the weight of living under sanctions, cyber attacks, and the looming threat of war. And yet she still believed in peace. She still had hope. You know, when I was a little girl growing up in Mississippi, I used to believe that if someone hurt you, it was because they didn't know better. And I carried that belief with me into adulthood, into the way I approached life, conflict, even politics. But somewhere along the way, I began to realize that some of the biggest wounds in the world aren't caused by ignorance. They're caused by intent. And that's what breaks my heart about what's happening right now with Iran. Because this situation, this push toward confrontation, doesn't feel new. It doesn't feel like an isolated event. It feels like part of a much bigger pattern, one we've seen time and time again. And the pattern always begins the same way: with fear, with justification, with the careful painting of another country as a threat. And it ends the same way too, in ash. Now, I've stood on stages and sat across from generals, politicians, mothers, and veterans. I've looked into the eyes of men who've lost their limbs and women who've lost their children. And I've come to this deep, unsettling realization: every single one of our so-called necessary wars follows a script written by people who rarely step foot on the battlefield, a script that always starts with, "We're doing this for freedom. We're doing this to protect democracy. We're doing this because they're dangerous." But when the dust settles, when the coffins are returned, and the money is counted, we're left asking, freedom for whom? Democracy where? Who was really protected? You look at Vietnam, then Iraq, then Afghanistan, then Libya. The names change, the presidents change, the justifications change, but the results, the pain, the aftermath, they don't. The pattern is always there. And now we see it circling Iran. Once again, we're being told they're a threat. Once again, we hear talk of nuclear weapons, of rogue states, of moral duty. But I've lived long enough to know that when the United States says it's going to war for justice, there's often something else beneath the surface, something strategic, something geopolitical, something profitable. Iran sits in a region rich with resources, bordering nations that are key players in global power struggles. This isn't just about a bomb. This is about oil. This is about influence. This is about control. And you don't need to be a foreign policy expert to see that. You just need to look at a map. You just need to look at history. Iran is one of the few nations in that region that refuses to bend to Western pressure. It's a proud, ancient country with its own agenda, its own allies, and its own power. And that makes it inconvenient for those who want to dominate the region economically and militarily. So here we are again, watching as familiar language is used to stir fear, watching as the drums of war begin to beat softly at first, then louder. And I'm asking myself, how many times must we walk this road before we admit we're not walking toward peace? How many times must we sell the same story before we say this isn't about them? This is about us. About our desire to maintain control, to protect our global dominance, to silence any country that dares to challenge the narrative. I'm not saying Iran is perfect. No country is. But I am saying we must not be so eager to believe that every war is righteous, that every conflict is born out of goodness. Because when you peel back the slogans, what you often find is power, raw, hungry, and unapologetic. And so I speak now not as a politician, not as a scholar, but as a human being who's seen too many good people suffer from the consequences of power games. I speak as someone who believes in truth-telling, even when it's uncomfortable. And the truth is, the war machine doesn't sleep. It just finds new names, new faces, new enemies. Iran is not the beginning, and if we're not careful, it won't be the end. The real question isn't, is Iran a threat? The real question is, why do we keep needing a threat at all? Why do we keep replaying the same movie and pretending it's a documentary? Because until we answer that, until we break that cycle, the pattern will continue, and more people will die, not for peace, but for power. When you turn on the news and hear about war, they don't show you the little girl in Tehran hiding in the closet, covering her ears, praying the night doesn't end in screams. They don't show you the elderly man clutching a photograph of his son who vanished in an American airstrike. They don't show the nurse in a burned-out hospital with no electricity, wiping blood off a child's face with a shaking hand. They don't show you that because it's too real, too human, too heartbreaking. But that's exactly what war is. It's not maps and missiles. And the people, more than anything, are the ones we forget when we talk about power, about politics, about global domination. I've been in rooms where decisions were made. I've sat across from the powerful and the influential, and I've learned one thing that stays with me to this day. The further you are from the consequences, the easier it is to justify them. It's easy to say collateral damage when you don't know the names of the dead. It's easy to say surgical strike when you've never seen what happens after the surgery. It's easy to say regime change when you don't have to rebuild the lives broken by that change. But I have met the people on the other end of those words. I've held the hands of women who've lost everything, their homes, their children, their sense of peace. I've spoken with soldiers who've come home haunted, unable to sleep, unable to explain the things they've seen and done. Listen to refugees who walked across borders with nothing but their dignity, only to be met with suspicion and fear. These people, their stories, their pain, they are not footnotes in a strategy memo. They are the real cost of war. So when we talk about the war on Iran, let's not pretend it will be any different. Let's not fool ourselves into believing this will be clean, or quick, or contained. It never is. War doesn't knock politely. It tears through homes, through hospitals, through history. It burns what took generations to build in a matter of seconds. It shatters the soul of a nation, and yet those calling for it sit oceans away, protected by privilege, insulated from the heartbreak they unleash. What breaks my heart even more is that many of the people who will suffer in Iran, they have no say in their government's decisions. They have no desire for conflict. They want to live. They want to thrive. They want to dance at weddings and grow old with the ones they love, just like we do, just like anyone does. They're not looking to dominate anyone. They're just trying to survive. But in the narrative of domination, their humanity becomes invisible. Their lives become numbers. Their dreams become irrelevant. And that, to me, is the greatest violence of all, the erasure of human dignity under the shadow of military ambition. And I must speak directly now to those in power, those making decisions in rooms without windows. You may never meet the people whose lives your choices will destroy, but know this: their lives matter, their children matter, their pain will echo long after your speeches end. You can erase borders on a map, but you cannot erase the trauma you leave behind. That trauma lives in the body, in the soil, in the memory of a people. So I ask you, what if it were your child, your sister, your mother? What if the sirens were sounding in your city, not theirs? Would you still call it necessary? Would you still say it's worth it? We must stop talking about war in terms of strategy and start talking about it in terms of souls. Because until we do, we will keep making the same mistakes. We will keep sacrificing lives for illusion. We will keep pretending that domination is progress, when in truth it is our most primitive failure. And I believe, with every fiber of my being, that we are better than this, that we can see past the fear, past the politics, past the propaganda, and recognize the humanity in each other. Because when we do, when we truly see each other, we can no longer justify the bombs. We can no longer accept the blood. We can no longer make war feel noble. It will feel only what it is: a tragedy we chose when peace was still possible. There's a moment, and it happens in every generation, when you realize the world is not as simple as they taught you. You begin to understand that justice doesn't always wear a white hat, and the people writing the rules aren't always playing fair. I remember when I first started asking deeper questions about war, about conflict, about who gets to decide who's good and who's evil. It was like pulling back the curtain on a stage play you've watched your whole life, only to realize it was never quite real. And when I look at the war rhetoric surrounding Iran, I see that curtain again. I see the same old story being played out word for word. It's not a new crisis. It's an old playbook, the empire playbook. Let me tell you something I've learned about empires. They don't need peace, they need control, and control doesn't always come through kindness. It comes through force, through fear, through the art of turning resistance into a threat. Iran, right now, is not just a country. It is, to the people pulling the strings, a strategic inconvenience. It's a nation that refuses to bow, to be molded, to submit. And for those who measure dominance in bases and barrels of oil, that's unacceptable. You see, real domination isn't loud. It's not always about tanks and bombs. Sometimes it's subtle: sanctions, propaganda, alliances designed not to uplift but to isolate. It's the quiet smothering of a nation's autonomy until its people are too hungry, too tired, too afraid to stand tall. And once that happens, once the backbone of a people has been worn down, that's when the real conquest begins. Not with a bang, but with a pen. And I think of history, not just the big wars, but the ones we don't teach in school. How many governments were toppled not for tyranny, but because they were in the way of someone else's ambition. How many leaders were demonized because they dared to say, "No, we will not be your puppet"? And how many times have we, the people, swallowed the story without asking who wrote it? Iran is complex. Its government has done things worthy of scrutiny, but this hunger to push it into war, this isn't about democracy, this is about empire. It's about a long-term strategy to dominate the Middle East, to control the flow of oil, to neutralize any power that might challenge the influence of Western interests in the region. And let's be clear, domination wears 1,000 disguises. It'll call itself liberation. It'll dress up in the language of human rights, but its core remains the same: control everything you can, and silence anything you can't. I've sat across from men who believe in this model, who speak of global leadership as if it's a trophy to be won, and I've felt the chill of their indifference. The way they talk about nations as pieces on a chessboard. They don't speak of mothers, or art, or culture, or the soul of a people, just strategy, just leverage, just power. And when I hear leaders speak of Iran as a threat, I ask, a threat to whom? A threat to people's lives, or a threat to someone else's ambition to control the world's last untamed territories? And you know what haunts me? It's that in the empire playbook, the people never matter. Not the American citizens who fund these wars through their taxes, not the Iranian civilians who suffer the brunt of it all, not the soldiers sent to die in deserts for objectives that shift like sand. The people, the heartbeat of every nation, are simply background noise. So I say this now from my soul to yours. We must stop pretending this is just politics. This is about the soul of how we engage with the world. Are we going to be the kind of civilization that bullies its way through resistance, or the kind that chooses diplomacy over domination? I believe in truth, and the truth is the war on Iran isn't about protection, it's about preservation of power, of dominance, of an old system terrified of losing its grip. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let that system fall, not with violence, but with clarity, with courage, with the audacity to choose peace, even when war feels more familiar. There's something we rarely talk about when it comes to war. Not the weapons, not the alliances, not even the losses. It's the stories, the way they're told, the way they're shaped. Because stories are powerful. Stories tell us who to fear, who to trust, who to mourn, and who to ignore. And in every war, every single one, the stories come first. The narrative is planted like a seed, long before the first missile is fired. And that's what keeps me up at night when I look at how Iran is being portrayed, because I know what it means when the truth is manipulated. I've seen it, I've lived it, and I won't pretend not to recognize it now. We are being told a story, a very carefully written one, a story where Iran is irrational, dangerous, a looming threat, and the United States, always the hero, always the protector, always the light against the dark. But real life is not a Hollywood script, and real people, real countries, are not just good or evil. They are layered, flawed, complex, just like all of us. I think of how media outlets speak of Iran with one voice, one fear-filled tone, every headline a warning, every segment a threat. And I ask myself, where are the Iranian mothers, the school teachers, the engineers, the poet? Where are their voices in this story? Where is their humanity? It's not there, because this story doesn't need their humanity, it only needs their danger. And when we reduce an entire nation of over 80 million people to one threat, we make it easier to justify war. We make it easier to sleep at night while families lose everything. We make it easier to watch cities fall without feeling a thing. You know, I've sat with journalists Good people who've told me how hard it is to tell the full truth in a system that demands a headline, a quick soundbite, a story that sells fear because fear keeps the machine running, because fear brings in ratings. But what if we didn't buy that fear anymore? What if we demanded more? I remember interviewing a young Iranian filmmaker years ago. Her voice was soft, but her message was powerful. She said, "The world doesn't see us, they only see what others say about us." That sentence never left me, because it's true. Most people know more about the idea of Iran than the reality, and the truth is, that's intentional. You see, war needs a villain, not just a government to oppose, but a face to hate. It needs us to feel nothing when a city is bombed. It needs us to believe the people in that city are not like us, not worthy of our empathy, and that is the greatest danger of narrative manipulation. It doesn't just distort the facts, it steals our compassion. I'm reminded of how during other wars, the media has spun similar tales, how weapons of mass destruction became a rallying cry in Iraq, only to be proven false, how Gaddafi in Libya was framed as the singular problem, and once he was gone, the country descended into chaos. The pattern is always the same: tell the story, control the image, and let the public believe that war is the only answer. But war is never the only answer. It's just the most profitable one for some. And so I say to the journalists, to the broadcasters, to the influencers who shape the way people think, you hold the power to start or stop a war. You may not carry a weapon, but your words can be just as dangerous, or just as healing. Choose truth, choose depth, choose the whole picture, not the convenient one. And I say to the people watching, don't accept the story you're handed. Ask questions, listen to voices outside your comfort zone, humanize those you've been told to fear, because once you see someone as human, truly human, it becomes much harder to bomb their home, much harder to look away. In the end, every war has two fronts: the battlefield and the airwaves. And the airwaves are where the war begins. If we lose our ability to tell the truth, to hear the truth, to feel the truth, then we've already lost everything worth fighting for. When I was younger, I used to believe that morality was a straight line, that good and bad were always obvious, that when a nation said it was fighting for justice, it really meant it. But life has taught me something more complicated, something more painful and more honest. It's taught me that power often wears the mask of morality, and that those who shout the loudest about justice are not always the ones who practice it. And when I look at how the United States justifies its aggression toward Iran, I hear those same moral words again. Words like freedom, human rights, liberation. But I've lived long enough to ask, is this morality real? Or is it selective? Because you can't call yourself the defender of human rights while ignoring the pain of those suffering under your allies. You can't preach freedom while funding regimes that crush it. That's not justice, that's branding. Let's be clear. The Iranian government has problems. It has committed injustices that must be addressed. No one is denying that. But when I see leaders use those injustices as the reason to justify sanctions, isolation, and even war, I have to ask, where is this same energy for other countries doing the very same things? Or worse, why is morality used as a sword against one country and a blindfold for another? We say we care about women's rights in Iran, and yes, we should, but what about in Saudi Arabia, where women were until recently banned from driving, from voting, from leaving their homes?
Without male permission, we support that government. We arm it, we trade with it. No talk of war, no threats of sanctions, just smiles and handshakes. We say we care about democracy, but we've supported coups that toppled democratic governments when they didn't serve our interests. We've turned a blind eye to election fraud in countries aligned with our economic goal. We've punished nations, not for suppressing democracy, but for choosing leaders who challenge American dominance. And that's not morality, that's manipulation. True morality doesn't bend to convenience, it doesn't shift based on economic gain, it doesn't label one group as worthy of saving and another as expendable. True morality stands even when it costs something, even when it means challenging your own reflection in the mirror. And that's the test we are failing right now. You see, when morality becomes a weapon instead of a compass, it loses its meaning. It becomes something to wave in front of cameras while doing the exact opposite behind closed doors. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of watching leaders pretend to be righteous while orchestrating destruction, and I'm even more tired of watching the world buy into it, because the greatest tragedy isn't just that power corrupts, it's that power convinces good people that bad actions are justified. It convinces nations that their pain is more important than someone else's. It convinces us that we are heroes when we are behaving like bullies. I have met too many broken families, buried too many dreams under the rubble of wars fought in the name of justice to stay silent. I know what real justice looks like. I've seen it in the eyes of women rebuilding their communities from nothing, in the courage of children who keep learning even as bombs fall, in the hands of aid workers who show up without judgment, without an agenda, just love. That is justice. That is morality. And if we are not acting from that place, if our wars are not born of deep love, of equal compassion for all people, then we are not waging justice. We are waging hypocrisy. And so I say to anyone who still believes the war on Iran is about moral duty, look deeper. Ask why. Ask why some lives are mourned and others are dismissed. Ask why some governments are condemned and others are embraced. Ask what price morality is really being sold for and who's paying it. Because until we stop using morality as a disguise for domination, until we choose integrity over image, we will keep losing our soul one war at a time. And one day, we may wake up and realize that in the pursuit of being the world's enforcer, we forgot how to be human. There's a voice inside each of us, that quiet, steady whisper, that knows the difference between what is easy and what is right. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it just waits, patiently, for us to listen. And I believe, with every fiber of my being, that this is one of those moments where we must finally stop, get still, and truly listen, because what's unfolding with Iran isn't just a political issue, it's a spiritual one. It's a test of who we are, a test of whether we will choose the familiar path of power and domination, or if for once, we will dare to take the harder road, the road of peace. Now I know what some people will say, that peace is naive, that the world is too dangerous, that Iran is too unpredictable, that we must protect ourselves, show strength, send a message. But let me ask you, when did we start confusing peace with weakness? When did we start believing that the only way to solve a problem was to kill it? When did we decide that dropping bombs showed more strength than sitting down and having the hard, honest conversations? Because peace, real peace, is not passive. It takes courage. It takes listening to people you don't agree with. It takes finding the humanity in someone you've been told to fear. It takes patience, humility, and above all love. And love, my friends, is not just a feeling, it's a decision, a daily commitment to choose connection over control, understanding over domination. I think about Dr. King and what he taught us, that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice, and that means peace cannot be built on the ruins of someone else's freedom. It cannot be forced through threats or bought through silence. Peace is earned, not through violence, but through vision, through leadership that dares to look beyond today's headlines and ask, what kind of world are we leaving behind? And when I look at this situation with Iran, what I see is an opportunity, yes, an opportunity, not just to avoid war, but to rewrite the story altogether, to say no to another cycle of destruction, to say yes to something different, something better. I think of the diplomats, the peace builders, the grassroots organizers, the people working in the shadows, trying to build bridges where others are lighting fires. They don't make the news, but they are our greatest hope. And I think of the young people in Tehran, in New York, in London, in Islamabad, who are watching this unfold, who are wondering what kind of world they're inheriting, who are tired of seeing their futures turned into battlegrounds. These young people don't want war, they want dignity, they want opportunity, they want a seat at the table where decisions are made, not a lifetime of cleaning up the damage after those decisions explode. To them I say, don't lose hope, don't let fear define your future, don't let anyone tell you that peace is impossible. The truth is, we've never really tried it. We've tried negotiation, backed by threats. We've tried diplomacy with a knife at someone's throat. We've tried pretending to listen while preparing to strike, but we haven't yet tried the kind of peace that starts in the heart, the kind that says, your life is just as sacred as mine, your pain matters just as much. We need that kind of peace now, desperately, because if we go down this road, if we wage war on Iran, again, it won't just destroy cities, it will destroy what little trust remains between nations. It will destroy the hope of a future not ruled by fear, and it will destroy the very thing we claim to be protecting, our humanity. So I ask, with all the love I can muster, is domination really worth our souls? Is victory worth the children we'll bear? Is power worth the peace we'll never know? We stand at a crossroads, and no, peace is not easy, but it's the only path that honors the truth of who we are. It's the only path that sees every life, Iranian, American, Israeli, Palestinian, all of us as sacred, and it's the only path that leads us somewhere new. So let's be bold enough to choose it, not just with words, but with action, with policy, with compassion, with love, because the world doesn't need more conquerors, it needs more healers, and we can be those healers if we choose to.